Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Johan, for that introduction. It's always dangerous presenting last because you feel like everything that you need to say has been said already. So hopefully I can do justice to this. Excuse me. So as Johan mentioned, the program was started in 2012. It's funded by the Department of Science and Technology, and it's been hosted at the CSIR ever since I started with the program in 2012. Well, what happened is in 2008, the Competitive Supply Development Plan was initiated by the Department of Public Enterprises in conjunction with the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Science and Technology. And I won't use the full names in future, I'll just use the acronyms. But effectively, what they said is, how do we support the infrastructure rebuild program of the country? Because there's so much of money that's going to be spent in the infrastructure rebuild program. I think at that stage, they mentioned a figure of close to 650 billion rands. And how do we ensure that South African industries benefit from that? How do we revitalize the manufacturing sector of South Africa based on the projects that are to be rolled out? And that's led to the conception of the Technology Localization Implementation Unit, which was aligned to support the infrastructure rebuild program by supporting the manufacturing sector in South Africa. Effectively, what we do is we work with the manufacturing sector, and as part of the technology localization plan of the DST, we look at how can we implement technological interventions at companies that will enhance their competitiveness. So over the years, because the program is aligned to state procurement, we've identified three main focus areas that the program will work in. The first being energy, and Indivu spoke a lot about energy already, but we basically look at three sectors at the moment: the renewable energy sector, the nuclear energy sector, which is coming up and we're beginning to gear ourselves up for that, and coal-fired power stations. From a transport perspective, we look at the passenger rail sector, the freight rail sector, and of recent times, due to Operation Pikisa, we're beginning to look at the projects that are linked to shipbuilding and boat building, which is in the marine sector. From another perspective, most of you might be aware that the telescope program, SKA, the Square Kilometer Array program, is being launched in the country. The precursor to that has been the Meerkat, and we're looking at how can we support localization within that program, as well as designated products. And designated products, for those of you in the room who don't understand the concept, designated products actually is cross-cutting along all of those sectors. Effectively, what government has done between DTI and National Treasury is to understand where there's capability that exists in the country, but however, we're importing a lot of that product into the country. So one of the sectors that's linked to that is the valve manufacturing sector, which was designated last year, and we're looking at how can valves be procured locally. And that's the enforcement of designation happens mainly within the state procurement environment. But hopefully by enforcing it within the state procurement environment, I think one of the colleagues said earlier on, using the government procurement processes and procurement opportunities to grow industry so that they can become competitive on the larger scale. Then we also look at the strategic infrastructure programs and the oil and gas sector as well, which is also linked to Operation Pikisa now. So when we first started this program in 2012, all the TLIU was given was this first program here called the Firm Technology Assistance Packages. However, 12 months later, we were given a larger bouquet of programs, and I'm just going to give you a brief description of what these instruments do. So we have the Technology Assistance Packages, and so just to go back, you know, we heard about all the challenges facing manufacturing at the moment and the decline in manufacturing. So these packages were put in place to say, how do we enhance the competitiveness of manufacturing to grow it? So the Firm Technology Assistance Package is linked at assisting individual companies. Now, how does that process go about? And I'll unpack that a little bit later in slides in this presentation. But effectively, it's identifying companies that can uptake opportunities that exist within the state procurement environment, understanding what are the gaps of those companies, and how do we close the gaps so those companies can work and gain projects in that environment. And as I said, I'll unpack that a little later. We then also launched what we call a sector-wide technology assistance package. Now, what was the rationale behind that? is that we could only reach X number of companies with the budget that we had within any financial year. But we identified that there was a need to assist sectors more holistically. And I think it's kind of, you heard of those in the other presentations prior to mine. So working with the sectors, we try to identify what are the common needs, the common challenges that exist in a sector, and how do we set up centers of excellence or shared technology platforms that can act as a facility where companies, whether they are large or small, will have access to high-end technology that will allow them to become more competitive and also to allow them to become more compliant. I will speak about a I'll speak about a sector-wide technology assistance package a little later on to explain how that works. The next program is a technology development grant. Around 2013, we were doing a post-mortem with the state-owned companies to understand the IP that is being used by the state-owned companies. Where does it exist? Who owns those IPs? And to our dismay, we found that the IP, in many instances, was not owned by the SOC. It was owned by a foreign OEM or a sole supplier. Very dangerous situation, because if that foreign OEM decides to pull out of the country, we go backwards. If you have a sole supplier that owns the IP, then effectively you don't have a competitive environment, because you're at the beck and call of that sole supplier. So we then launched a technology development grant. Effectively, what the technology development grant is there for is to ensure that we can create IP locally. And I think it was alluded to in a previous presentation. The new concept that we're looking at is called the design for local. How do we start designing products and systems that can be locally built? Understanding what is the capability that exists locally, and how do we design systems that we can build locally? And once we build them locally and we perfect them locally, how do we export it? So that that technology development grant is to say, how do we start designing locally? Now, there is currently a partnership that exists between the CSIR and Transnet Engineering, where we have 150 engineers on site in a building that has just been revamped for Transnet. And the idea behind that is to support design for local, to design products that can be built in a local, locally developed locomotive that can then be exported into Africa. The locomotive that Transnet is looking at is called the Trans-Africa locomotive. And there's about 5 different products that we're looking at currently that can be designed and built locally for that locomotive to compete with other OEMs in that space. Then my colleagues earlier on spoke about training, skills, and the lack of it in the country. So about 18 months ago, we launched the Science, Engineering, and Technology Industry Internship Program. What this program looks to do is to support students who are studying towards a science, engineering, and technology qualification at a university of technology, with placement into industry and exposure to real-life projects. Currently, this program is supporting in excess of 200 students who have been placed into industry, and we normally use the companies that we support on the firm technology assistance packages to place the students there. Why do we do that? For 2 reasons. One is that we have an established relationship with the company, but secondly, we want the students to get exposure to real-life projects, so that when they finish their qualification, they're not just having a theoretical qualification, they have a practical understanding. So by placing them at the companies that we work with, we get them to work on the projects that we are implementing at the companies, and therefore they have access to real-life projects, and we can actually see the development of the student during that process. Now, about 18 months ago, the TLRU also absorbed one of a DTI funded programs called the UNIDO SPX program, and with this we brought a different dimension to the unit. We started to do what we call industry analysis. Now, the UNIDO SPX programs used to do that, but what we want to do, or not what we want to do, what we're actually doing at the moment is that we are profiling and benchmarking companies. Now, this is creating a database in South Africa of what manufacturing capacity and capability exists. We currently do the profiling in 5 provinces around the country. That includes the Western Cape, KZN, Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and the Free State. That database at the moment sits in excess of 3,500 companies. and it's growing by a rate of 200 companies per month. I can tell you that this database is now being looked at by the OEMs and being accessed by the OEMs on a regular basis to understand what capability already exists in the country. Who can we partner with when we need to find local content suppliers? What we do is when an OEM starts to go through the profiling database and understands the kind of companies they want to work with, we then take those companies through a benchmarking process. So currently we have over 500 benchmark companies on that program. What's good about that benchmarking process is that the benchmarking tool that we use to assess those companies is a global tool. It's not a South African tool. So when we benchmark the companies, we compare them to their competitors based on SIC codes and NACI codes globally. And that database that we compare those suppliers to is in excess of 100,000 companies. Okay? So that benchmark database is now available to industry as well. And this creates the bridge that my colleague was talking about earlier on, is how do we link companies to OEMs? And now that's the kind of bridge that we are beginning to form between the OEMs and the companies. And finally, what we do is monitoring and evaluation. Now, Indy gave some nice stats during his presentation, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. So our program is only about 3 years old, but effectively, we stay with the companies, and we've been asked now to stay with the company for 5 years post-implementation. Because what we do is we set KPIs at the company pre-implementation. And post-implementation, we measure those KPIs for impact. And I have a slide later on that shows some of the impacts that have been created with the program to date since 2012. Oh, there's it up here. Okay, good. So since we started, and these are not the most updated, but till the end of the last financial year, based on what we've done in implementation, we've support that's been provided to 14 companies in terms of new products that have been developed in the country. 16 companies have been developed for export, and I'll give you a feel list now of how many companies we've supported thus far. Import substitution projects supported, in excess, 20 projects have been supported for that. Companies gaining work with an SOC is 35. Companies supported where SOC work has been retained, 47. And the creation of jobs due to implementation of assistance packages, 187. And this figure is growing currently at the moment. And this is direct jobs, it's not the indirect jobs. Okay? This is based on a support given to 80 companies thus far. So this is going to kind of answer some of the questions that were delivered in the previous presentations. So what we've identified is that our main customers is government, because that's the environment that we work in. And based on the projects that are identified by government, there'll be component and services for localization. So many times these contracts get awarded to large OEMs, because they're the only ones who can compete for it and get those contracts. However, these large OEMs need to find local content suppliers or local suppliers that they can work with, or capacity that they can gain to deliver. And that's the environment that we like to work in, is to develop the first, second, third, and fourth tier suppliers that can feed into the OEMs. And that's not saying that we don't work with OEMs, because we have worked with OEMs, and when I do the case studies, you'll see the OEMs that we've worked with. But effectively, it doesn't always have to be an advanced manufacturing solution at this level. We're doing projects at the moment where OEMs need suppliers that do basic fabrication, but don't know who those suppliers are. So it's not all doom and gloom for suppliers who are not at an advanced manufacturing phase of their lives. Because there is a need in that supply chain for suppliers that do basic manufacturing, but they don't have the systems, or they don't have the competitiveness to meet what the OEMs want. And that's what this program offers. It offers them the capability to develop themselves so that the OEMs can use them. So how does this support technology localization? Because the technology localization happens at this phase. But in order for that technology localization to happen, you need this area to be well supported. How do we develop these suppliers? And I spoke about the benchmarking capability assessments. And what kind of support is delivered to these suppliers? Technology transfer. Now that's the easiest way to enhance the technological capability of most of our companies. We can go to the development phase, which we'll see later on. But the transfer of technology has given us huge amounts of successes already. Research and development, and because we sit at the CSIR, and I have a slide later on, we'll explain how we're going to exploit sitting at the CSIR to ensure that research and development supports industry development. General supply development in terms of management training, process systems and manufacturing systems don't exist in many SMMEs. And without those existing, they're not going to be able to play in this environment. Quality systems. I can categorically say that most companies don't see the benefit of having a quality management system. And indeed had an ISO 50,000 on his presentation. But most companies don't see the benefit because you don't see a direct benefit. There's no ROI on having a QMS. But a proper implementation and following of a QMS will ensure that you become more competitive. Human capital development, and the TLRU thus far has not only supported local human capital development, we've had the opportunity of sending employees from a company to training providers internationally. And the difference that it's made to the capability of the company has been immense. There's one company that we supported in Cape Town. Just by training the operators of a laser cutting machine on the technology, they were able to reduce the cycle time of a part from 2 minutes to 20 seconds. Now, in terms of throughput, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of productivity, that's something you can't deny, that changes the environment that you work in. So I said I'll talk about how we work with firms. And it's a very structured process. So we would do a benchmarking and technology capability evaluation on a firm, which will then result in a gap analysis. And that will then start putting together a continuous improvement plan. The support that we deliver to the company can be in one of 4 themes. Access to technology platforms and shared technology services, which is nationally and internationally. Access to technical expertise, once again, nationally and internationally. And I can categorically state here in this room today that we have a lot of capability that exists within the science councils and the universities that can be used for the development of industry. And the University of Pretoria is one of the projects that I will talk about later on, where we use local expertise combined with international expertise to develop local technology. High-end technical skills development and design and tooling support. And this is a very important aspect, design and tooling support. I think we saw it in one of the earlier slides. If we're not designing our products, we don't own the IP. We don't own the system. So we need to support design and tooling to a large extent, because tooling is what drives manufacturing. So this is the discussion we've been having. What is the broader role of TLRU now to start integrating these solutions? I think I heard it in the earlier presentation. How do we create an integrated solution? So we see the DST engaging with government and understanding the problem statement and the national development needs. We see the TLRU sitting in this layer in between, where we want to create an integrated solution by working with all the other government-funded initiatives and with OEMs. And these opportunities we intend to unpack through a rhythm meeting that we host. A rhythm meeting is effectively where we bring government, OEMs, SOCs, and industry associations into one room to unpack the opportunities that exist, to understand what are the barriers to entry for industry to take advantage of the opportunities that exist. I already spoke about the profiling database and then energy assessment. So we work very closely with the National Cleaner Production Center, because how do we create holistic solutions to companies? One is that we work with the NCPC to ensure that every company that we work with has an energy assessment done on it, because that's a holistic solution. So this is unpacking how do we see the use of R&D to become a driver for industry development. So we work with industry on a daily basis, and industry has suppliers and customers. And okay, I'm going to try and run through it quickly. So there is a constant evolving need here. And so let me just open up this slide completely so I don't have to. So effectively, by understanding what industry's needs are, We can offer a holistic solution through the programs that are hosted within the Strategic Initiatives Implementation Unit. However, what we see as a greater opportunity that exists, by understanding the long-term needs and the medium-term needs of industry, we want to influence what happens within the research and development environment of the CSIR so that we can develop innovative solutions and technology developments that can be implemented through these units into industry based on the evolving needs. And those are just a list of capabilities that exist at the CSIR. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's just a small list of what can be done to support industry. Why do I have these other two call-outs at the bottom? The CSIR has partnership with all the higher education institutes, and therefore by that partnership, if the technology is already started developing here, we can bring it through the CSIR and implement it into industry. Also, where capacity does not already exist in industry, the CSIR has an enterprise creation for development division that can be used to start up new businesses. Okay, so I'm going to run through the case studies. So this is a case study where we speak about technology development that happened with the CSIR. Excuse me. So we use the built environment division. What we have here is, it's called a cement board insulator. This product was an asbestos containing product, and legislation came into place which means that the insulation board could not have asbestos any longer. So working with the built environment division of the CSIR, we were able to develop a product that used fibers that were developed within built environment to replace asbestos in the cement board insulator, but keep the properties of it the same or better. And now this product will replace 7 imported products that are being used in the country, but most importantly, it was designed and developed locally, and it's local IP. Powertech Transformers is the company that we worked with, and I spoke about the University of Pretoria. Where we worked with the University of Pretoria, Powertech Transformers and international experts to develop the short circuit integrity for a transformer winding. That's a transformer winding. Using finite element models, we're able to develop the technology that is required to ensure that the short circuit integrity is contained within this transformer winding. This now has won Powertech Transformers additional orders with Eskom, but also they're now beginning to export their products to Nigeria. Renewable energy project. This is a project that was done in the Eastern Cape in East London, in a very small area that people would not have normally noticed. But effectively, we assisted a company called Adventure Power to develop a medium voltage wind turbine. That's a medium voltage wind turbine. That product has been now developed locally, including the blades. If anyone wants to know, the blades are built in the factory. All of that, what you see there, is built in that factory and installed by that company. That product is now being exported to the Philippines. So we can build locally and export renewable energy projects. This is my last slide. So I said we'll speak about a sector-wide tap. In 2011, the DST supported 26 foundries. The 26 foundries, we did a post-mortem of what happened at the 26 foundries in 2012. We understood that the South African foundry sector is a sector in distress. And how do we, well, what were the problems? And the problems were that we were not using advanced technology like the European or the overseas foundries were using. So what was the main difference between the local foundries and the international foundries? And we found that simulation technology was one of the main differences. However, when we did an exercise on what was the cost of implementing simulation technology, we found that a typical license of a simulation package ranges between 1 million to 2 million rands. The skills to drive it are just as expensive. Okay. Now, if you understand the foundry sector in South Africa, a lot of the foundries are family-owned businesses which are SMMEs to a large extent. If you tell them to invest 2 million rands into software and expertise in their foundry, it would probably render them bankrupt. So what we did is we established a simulation network, a shared facility at the Vaal University of Technology. What this done, it then gave access to any foundry, whether you're small or you're a big foundry, to high-end technology, and all you had to do was pay for the time that you use the technology and not to pay for the technology on an annual basis. But what we did further to that is that we ensured that this became a national program. We created portal sites for the simulation network in KZN, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and the Free State, and we have 2 centers in Gauteng. So whether you were in the Western Cape, KZN, or Eastern Cape, you could still get your simulation done by just visiting one of the portal sites. And therefore, we made it accessible to industry and cost effective. I can tell you now that there's 17 foundries at the moment using this simulation network. The biggest success story we have is with a company in KZN that does line hardware. They never left KZN, and they've had 3 new products simulated through the casting simulation network, saving them in the region of 30 million rand per product. And therefore, we know we will now start establishing more centers like this, where industry can have access to high-end technology, but at a fraction of the cost. And I think that was kind of being highlighted with my colleague who did the product lifecycle management presentation, is that if we create these environments, we can become competitive as long as we make it accessible and cost effective for industry. Thank you.